Well, good morning. I'm feeling the energy here today. This is good, oh yeah. All right, so there is a sporting event in Alaska called the Iditarod. It is a 1,000-mile dog sled race that's held every single year in March in Alaska in very harsh conditions. Interesting little fact is it did not start out as a race, it started out as a rescue. In 1925, the remote town of Nome, Alaska experienced an outbreak of bacterial infection called diphtheria, a highly contagious, often deadly disease, specifically with kids. So the town had 1,400 residents, one physician. His name was Dr. Curtis Welch, and he realized without treatment that this disease could decimate the population. The problem was that the only anti-toxin serum that they could find was several hundred miles away. The weather made it impossible for a ship or plane to transport it. And so what the town did is they had this emergency meeting where they determined to put together a team of 20 mushers and 150 sled dogs and then travel as fast as they can to this town several hundred miles away. Well, they passed over frozen terrain and mountains and rivers and treacherous sea ice. They faced blizzards. They encountered negative 60-degree Fahrenheit temperature. I'm from Wisconsin. Even that's cold to me, right? Colder than a mother-in-law's kiss. That is cold, but they did it. And what would normally have taken several weeks to complete took them just 5.5 days. They transported 3,000 units of this antitoxin, and as a result, were able to contain the outbreak. 5 or 6 people died, but it didn't decimate the community. Now, the Iditarod was created many years after this rescue, and it was created to commemorate the mission. It was created as an event for people to get together with their family and friends and watch and enjoy. It's really a spectacle. Well, starting an event to commemorate an incredible rescue, an incredible mission is obviously a great thing. But there is a valuable lesson that I think it's important we do not miss, and that is something that starts out with a great purpose and great intentions and a specific mission can eventually become a spectator sport. It can happen in industry, it can happen in business, it can happen in our personal lives with our goals, and it can certainly happen with churches. And so today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna kick off a 3-week teaching series called Impact, because I do not want that to happen to us. And very candidly, this is a series for those of you who consider Timberlake to be your church. All right, so I'm gonna do my best in the next 3 weeks to remind you of our mission, who we are, where we're headed, and what it's gonna take to get there. And if you're like, this really isn't my church yet, I've been checking it out, I'm kind of trying to consider if it might be my church, this is a great series for you to be a part of, because we're gonna pull back the curtain and let you know what makes us tick and what drives us as a church. And if you're like, I'm just a guest, I just showed up here, first time here, I want you to know we are glad to have you. And my hope today is, regardless of where you're at in your views of Jesus or in your views of church, my goal is that by the time you leave here today, at least you'll leave inspired, and you'll be like, well, regardless of what I think about the church, if it stays on mission, it does make a difference. And so that's my hope and desire today. Every church starts out with a very clear sense of mission. And every church words it a little bit differently, but at its core, the mission of every church is to help people find and follow Jesus. That's the mission of every church. And it's rooted in some of the very last words Jesus ever spoke to his closest followers, his disciples. He looks at them and he says this, he says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So Jesus looks at his closest disciples and he says, I am giving you the responsibility of engaging with people and relating to people and connecting with people and treating people in such a way that it points them to me. That was the mission Jesus handed off to his disciples in the first generation of Jesus' followers. And then at some point, they handed off that mission to the next generation. And then it was handed off to the next generation and the next. Fast forward to today, for those of us who consider ourselves to be followers of Jesus, that is the mission that we hold and steward. We steward it as individuals, but collectively as a church, when we link arms and come together, it is our mission as a church. It is our responsibility to help people find and follow Jesus. Now, if you've ever been part of a new church, you know that this is very obvious in new churches because there's an excitement, there's a passion, there's often momentum that comes when people are linking arms, they're starting a church and they're saying, we're doing everything we can. We're obsessing over trying to help people find and follow Jesus. We're doing whatever we can to point people toward him. But then what happens is over time, churches get established. Facilities are built. Programs are put into place. Systems are established. The church begins to grow. More and more leaders start coming on staff. People come, people go, people move. And what often happens is over time, it's not intentional, it's very unintentional for the most part. There is this tendency for churches to drift into becoming a gathering of spectators who get together for an event or a service. So it's like, oh, well, let's get together weekly. Let's hear great music. Let's hear inspirational talk. Let's drop our kids off in the program. We'll grab a coffee and maybe network with people. And so unintentionally, we see this in churches all across the world where they become gatherings of people who come together to commemorate a mission rather than participating in it. Which is why every so often, it is so important for us to pause and to refocus ourselves and to remind ourselves who we are and why we exist. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's pretty straightforward. We exist to help people find and follow Jesus. That's our mission. We did not get started to host events and provide great music and create a safe place to meet people. We didn't get started to simply teach good values to our kids or hear a faith-based TED Talk. Those things are nice. Some of those things help us move the mission forward, but that is not our mission. That's not why we got started. Now, if you're not familiar with our church's history, it was the summer of 1989, and 7 families came together and they began to dream of starting a new church on the east side. And their dream was to create a church that gave people a safe space to explore the claims of Jesus. And then if they surrendered their lives to Jesus and had an experience in which they're like, man, I want to follow Jesus, then Timberlake says, in these early days, these families says, Timberlake will be a church that helps them follow Jesus. So in November of 1989, just a few months after they started dreaming and planning, Timberlake launched its very first official service in Elcott Elementary School in Redmond. 156 people showed up, right? So right around the corner. A few years into the church, as it was growing, spring of 1992, our church moved into Evergreen Middle School. There was excitement, there was passion. And as more and more people started following Jesus, it became obvious that in order to fuel our mission, we need a facility to help us do this. So the people started talking about making it happen, and then they sacrificed to make it happen, and they did it with joy. And I know that because I recently saw this video footage of some of the early days of the church before we were in a building. Look at just the excitement. They got the hats on. This guy's walking around with a wicker basket collecting either pledges or money. I mean, they're just like, let's do this thing. And then by God's grace, the facility started being built, and brick and mortar started coming together. And there were people who said, man, we have this vision to put a building in Redmond that will fuel our mission. And since then, we've added to the building. We've added campuses. We have one in Duval that we own. We have a building down in Castle Rock 2 hours away. Our church has had an exciting journey that has included the highest of highs and lowest of lows. And through it all, we have seen the faithfulness of God. Here we are 35 years later, and we are thriving. We have so much to celebrate. At the same time, we have to be very careful to guard ourselves from becoming spectators who get together and commemorate what once was. We have to regularly remind ourselves that what we do is the mission God's given us. So everything from our children's programs to the groups that we host in people's homes, to the various things we do here in our facility, to our weekly services, to the mailers we send out, like all of that is part of our mission, and it's to point people to Jesus. Now, we've seen this before, right? Where you got a guy or gal, they're out on a street corner, and they're holding a sign. They're holding an arrow sign that looks something like this, and it's got wording all over it, and they're holding that sign. And by the way, these people always look like they've had some edibles, right? Because they either got a lot of energy or no energy, and they're just like, here we go, right? And these people will hold signs in all types of weather, all types of environments, and the goal is not to get people to look at the sign, notice the sign, well, whoa, look at the wording on that sign, look at the calligraphy, it's just amazing. No, the goal of the sign is to point people somewhere. It's to point them to a store, it's to point them to a sale, it's to point them to a new restaurant. Well, this is what we as a church do. As individuals, we do it as well if we follow Jesus, but as a church, we come together and we do everything we can to point people to Jesus. We do it in all types of weather, in all types of environments. We just want, with our lives and collectively as a church, through our services and various things we do, we want to point people to the hope and the healing that's found in Jesus. But the longer we do this, the more redundant it becomes. So I've been following Jesus for more than 4 decades. And I gotta tell you, it gets a little old. It's like, do I always have to forgive people who hurt me, right? Do I always have to be selfless? Do I always have to be serve others? Do I always gotta be open-handed and be generous? When do I just get to start building up a stockpile, right? Like is this gonna go on forever? And you know this is true. If you've been a part of a church for a long time, and Timberlake, 35 years old, churches eventually feel like, man, this is redundant. It gets old and it's like, man, we gotta infuse some life. So sign holders, when they're just kind of just bored and tired, what do? They start to just get creative, say, what can we do to confuse energy? And they'll start spinning signs and they'll start doing creative things. Look at this guy. Came across this video. I mean, he's got every technique in the world to try to get people's attention, and he makes it to the news. They're so impressed with him. The problem is we don't know what the sign says or what direction it's pointing. Look at that. Don't even know what he's supposed to be doing. Well, churches do this. Churches do this all the time. We're trying to infuse energy, so we're like, let's get the most talented musicians. Let's do giveaways. Let's do a big event. Let's get as many people to show up as possible, right? Let's spin the sign. Let's get crazy. Let's do great messages. And guys, none of that stuff's wrong. It's fun. We need to do it. But if we're not careful, our sign will end up pointing in the wrong direction. Without even meaning to, our sign will point to hope being found in a political candidate. Our sign will point to things that we're against. We're against all these things. What often happens with churches is unintentionally the sign ends up pointing to us. Look at our talents. Look at how good we are. Look at how creative we are. Look at how fun our church. You need to be a part of our church because we're the greatest. And this shift from pointing in the direction of Jesus to pointing in another direction, often to ourselves, is very subtle, but it's very real. And what I wanna do today is I wanna take the rest of the time that we have, and I wanna look at a real life example of this that happened 2,700 years ago in the life of King Hezekiah. Right, King Hezekiah became the king of Judah when he was just 25 years old. At the time, the nation was in a political, financial, and spiritual mess. And the very first thing Hezekiah does, he says, I'm gonna focus on the spiritual mess. I'm gonna remove the idols, the pagan altars. I'm gonna establish worship practices that point people in the direction of God's goodness and God's faithfulness. There's a historical book in our Bible that summarizes his reign like this. Here's what we read. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before or after his time. He remained faithful to the Lord in everything, and he carefully obeyed all the commands the Lord had given Moses. So the Lord was with him, and Hezekiah was successful in everything he did. He was a godly man. He was a courageous leader, and God blessed him during his reign. We know this because we know that during his reign, which was almost 3 decades long, Judah was not conquered by another nation or empire. Pretty impressive, because Judah wasn't all that huge. We know that under his reign, Judah experienced economic growth, and they did a lot of construction. In fact, one of the biggest engineering feats that Hezekiah commissioned was an underground aqueduct that brought water into Jerusalem. It's known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, and it exists even to this day. So if you're in Jerusalem, you can go check out the tunnel. Hezekiah was incredibly wealthy. He had inherited so many resources from the people who had gone before him, from the kings, and even in his reign, he accumulated more and more. He was loved by almost everyone. I mean, he was living the good life. But then around 40 years old, he experiences a life-threatening illness and is confined to his bed. And while he's laying in bed, the Jewish prophet Isaiah shows up on the scene. And he doesn't come with a bunch of gifts from the hospital gift shop, right? He's not carrying flowers and a teddy bear. He didn't sneak in ice cream. He comes with a pretty devastating message. He looks at King Hezekiah on this bed and he says, Hezekiah, I need to let you know, your time's coming to an end. You need to wrap up your affairs. You're going to die very, very shortly. Now, how would you respond to a message like that? I'd start calling family and friends. I'd set up a GoFundMe account, right? I'd update my will immediately based on how my kids have been treating me recently, right? Not Hezekiah. The very first thing Hezekiah does when Isaiah walks out of the room is he turns his body to the wall and he begins to pray and he begins to beg God for healing. He begins to beg God for mercy. There's a lot of theological discussion on whether or not God ever changes his mind. There's a lot of debate over how much impact does prayer really have. But here's an example of a guy, Hezekiah, calling out to God even after he knows his destiny has been seemingly determined. Now, the reason this should matter to all of us is because there's a lot of people who have written books, they've written opinion pieces, they've written articles about the inevitable death of the church in America. There have been plenty of studies, plenty of reports that say the best days of the church are behind us. And as your pastor, I just want you to know I'm very aware of what the weather report looks like. I'm not naive. I read these books, I read these articles, I know the predictions. I know that the Seattle Times earlier this year declared us to be the least religious city in America. But I also need you to know I haven't given up hope. I wholeheartedly believe that if we as individuals and collectively as a church, if we would turn our hearts toward God and we would pray and we would ask God for his mercy and for his blessing, that God would renew us spiritually, that God would renew our church. I believe it's possible that God in his grace could allow Timberlake Church to be a part of a great spiritual awakening in our area. I wholeheartedly believe that because we see this pattern happening all throughout Scripture of people turning their hearts to God and God responds. And so even though Hezekiah is given a death sentence, he prays and God does respond to his prayer. We don't have time to read all the verses, but we learn that before Isaiah is even completely off of the palace grounds. I mean, this is just minutes earlier was with Hezekiah. God speaks to him again, says, turn around, go back to King Hezekiah and give him these very clear two messages. Message number one, God is going to heal you. Message number two, God is gonna protect Judah from Assyria, which had become a growing threat to the nation. So Isaiah comes with those messages. And then Isaiah makes it clear to King Hezekiah that God is going to do these things, not because of just your faithfulness and your prayers and just doing this for your sake, but God says, I'm going to do it for the sake of my servant David. Now, I gotta tell you, I've been pastoring for many, many years. That don't even make sense. I'm gonna heal you, but I'm gonna do it for the sake of my servant David. He's an ancestor of King David, but there are 13 generations that separate him. I mean, here's Hezekiah, here's King David. Look at all the kings in between them. He said, I'm gonna hear your prayer because of King David. In other words, I'm gonna respond to prayers prayed by King David. I'm gonna show mercy because of promises I made to King David. One of the most important lessons that every follower of Jesus should learn is that we are just a small piece of a gigantic puzzle that God has been assembling throughout history and across generations. This is us. In the perspective of time, we're just a small little piece of the puzzle. And the reason this is so important to understand is right now our church is experiencing incredible momentum. Our Redmond campus, larger than it's ever been. In 2024, we have baptized we have seen more people surrender their life to Jesus and baptize more people than any year in our history. We're gonna baptize another 30 people today that were spread out between our services, so we've already baptized some of them. We're experiencing momentum in so many of our ministries. And it'd be very easy, very tempting for us to take credit for it. Check us out. We're working hard, we're serving, we're volunteering with kids, we're pouring coffee, we're opening our home for groups, we're giving generously, like we're doing so much. Check out, God is responding to our faithfulness. And God is responding to our faithfulness, but I'm convinced God is also responding in large part to the prayers prayed by a small group of people in a living room in 1989. What we're experiencing is a result of people setting up and tearing down to hold weekly church services in an elementary school and then in a middle school. Now, I don't know if you've ever been a part of a set up, tear down church. I have on a couple different occasions, and I gotta tell you, it is fun, it is exciting, there is lots of energy for 6 months. And then it's redundant, and then it's boring, and then it just gets overwhelming. And who else is gonna join this team? But we had people do it at Timberlake Church week after week after week for more than 10 years. And what we're experiencing now is the compounded impact of 35 years of individuals linking arms, sacrificing to help people find and follow Jesus. Now, getting back to this story, God healed King Hezekiah, responded to his prayer, gave him another 15 years of life. And we don't know all the details behind it, but we do know that after God healed him, Hezekiah apparently began to believe there was something special about him, that somehow he deserved the goodness and blessing of God because pride started to creep into his heart. Hezekiah is healed. Not long after, the king of Babylon, a huge, powerful nation, sends some envoys to King Hezekiah with a gift basket and a card congratulating him on being healed. Say, man, we're super happy for you. And when the envoys show up, here's what we read. Hezekiah received the Babylonian envoys and showed them everything in his treasure houses, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the the oils. He showed them the oils. He also took them to see his armory and showed them everything in his royal treasuries. There was nothing in his palace or kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. Now, if this was a movie, this is where the drama starts to unfold. This is where the music starts to get a little eerie. Hezekiah's pride is starting to surface. Even though everything he is experienced is a result of God's blessing, he is becoming the center of his own story. Hezekiah walks these envoys around, and instead of saying, let me show you some of the ways God has blessed us in response to our faithfulness to him, let me show you all the things that God has given me way more than I could possibly deserve. Let me tell you about how God answered my prayer when I was on a deathbed, but it wasn't just my prayer, it was the prayer of my ancestor David from 13 generations earlier. I have never been more impressed with God. I've never been more in awe of God. When you walk around and you see all of this, just know this is pointing to the faithfulness and goodness of God. But Hezekiah doesn't do that. He loves God. He really does. But his pride has gotten in the way. And the arrow is now pointing to him. And do not miss this. It is possible for us to sincerely love God. But when we look at our talents and our resources and we look at the passions and the opportunities that come our way, it's very easy to begin to believe that at some level we deserved it. Right? That we're the center of the story. And so after these envoys leave, the prophet Isaiah asks King Hezekiah, he says, hey, let me ask you, who were those guys? Where were they from? Hezekiah gets a big grin on his face, and he said, well, they were from Babylon. And here's the deal, they brought me a gift basket. They brought me a card congratulating me on being healed. And he's just giddy. He says to Isaiah, you should have seen their reaction to everything I showed them. They were so jealous. They were so envious of me, all this wealth that I have. They were so envious of all the wealth we have as a nation. Here's what we read next. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, listen to this message from the Lord. The time is coming when everything in your palace, all the treasures stored up by your ancestors until now, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. Some of your very own sons will be taken away into exile. They will become eunuchs who will serve in the palace of Babylon's king. Isaiah said, this is gonna happen after you die. Things are not good. You took credit for something you should never have taken credit for. Instead of pointing to the goodness and faithfulness of God, you acted like it was your own doing. As a result, once you're dead, once you're gone, Babylon's gonna come in, take their armies, and then take it all. And then check this out. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, this message you have given me from the Lord is good. What? Did you not hear what the prophet just said? There's gonna come a time where the same guests that you just entertained, that you showed your glitz and glamour to, they're gonna march into the city, they're gonna castrate your sons, they're gonna take people captive, they're gonna destroy the temple, they're gonna ransack the gold and silver. And Hezekiah's response is, this message you've given me from the Lord is good. What is he thinking? Now, rarely in the scriptures do we ever get a look at someone's internal monologue, but in this case we do. We're told what he was thinking. For the king was thinking, at least there will be peace and security during my lifetime. I don't care if my actions impact the next generation. At least it won't happen in my lifetime. At least I'll have peace and safety. At least I'll be comfortable. Hezekiah loves God, but his pride and his comfort is starting to derail his life. This ought to be a warning to all of us, because it's pride and comfort that derails our character. It's pride and comfort that derails our values. It's pride and comfort that can derail a marriage. It can derail our friendships. And it can derail a church. I've seen this so many times. I was part of a church in this area for a couple of years. This was many years ago, that no longer exists. Why? Because of pride and comfort. Pride and comfort will derail a church from the mission. Guys, our church is 35 years old. I am the 6th pastor in our church's history. The pastors who've gone before me did an amazing job of leading this church and making sacrifices to get to enjoy what we do today. The reason we have buildings, team of people who are on staff leading the church, right? The reputation we have in the community, the stuff we're able to do for kids, the fact we've got budgets, all of that. Right? There are people who went before us, and I'm just gonna tell you personally, it'd be very easy for me to become really comfortable. It'd be very easy for me now to spend the next 15 years of my life focusing on trying to give good messages, ensuring we have great music, working with the team, trying to make sure we've got groups for everyone and we're ministering to our kids and to our children. And I'd never ask you for anything, and I wouldn't feel any pressure, and we'd all just be one big happy family. You'd be really happy because I'm not pushing you on anything. But here's the deal, in every season and in every generation, churches have to confront pride and comfort for the sake of the mission. Pride and comfort are how good churches go bad. And the question we all need to be asking ourselves, those of us who are part of Timberlake, is how do we steward the responsibility God has given us for our generation? How do we make certain that our children and our students and our friends and our communities have an opportunity in a very clear way to find and follow Jesus? Fast forward several years from now, how do we ensure we're prepared to hand off the church to the next generation instead of this attitude of like, at least it was good for my generation? How do we safeguard ourselves from derailing the mission God has given us? And the answer is very simple. We confront our pride and we confront our comfort. And so as we look to the years ahead, our leadership team has determined that we want to take time over the next year to prepare ourselves for the future. There's gonna be a day I stand up and say, here's kind of where we're going in the next 10 years, 15 years, but I want you to know that in the next year, we're gonna prepare ourselves for what God wants to do in the next 10 to 15. If you've been around for a while, you know one of the things I love to remind you of is that when we talk about mission and the mission work we do, it happens here, near, and far. Those three buckets. And so I want to clarify what I mean when I say that. When I talk about here, I'm talking about our campus, the Redmond campus, right? Many people think of mission work as the local and global outreach that occurs in the community around the world. And that's great, that's also mission. But our biggest mission is what happens in our doors. There's a lot of ministry we're able to do because of our facility, because of our staffing, because of having a place for children and students to meet, and for recovery groups. And there's a lot of mission we're able to do here. So when we talk about here, we're talking about our campus. We talk about near, we're talking about our community. We're talking about churches and nonprofits in our community that we partner with financially and with our time because of the growing impact that they have. And then when we talk about far, we're talking about our world. We're talking about the churches and nonprofits and high impact ministries outside of our local area that we partner with financially and with our time. And so as we prepare for the future, we want to be very specific in the next year to focus on confronting our pride and confronting our comfort. And the way that we're gonna confront our pride is by preparing ourselves through prayer. I like to get things done just like you do, right? I like to, let's accomplish. Let's just start racking up check marks and all the things we're doing. And we'll do some things next year, no doubt about it, but 2025 will be a year in which we focus on the discipline of prayer more than any year in our history. Prayer confronts our pride. Prayer positions us to say, God, our mailers are great, and our kids programs are great, and the things we do around here, and when we invite, we've got great talent, but God, ultimately, this is not about us. We need you to draw people to yourself. We'll hold the sign, we'll do our best, but God, ultimately, it is you that changes the human heart. And so in the coming year, we're gonna have an elevated emphasis on prayer. At the same time, we're gonna confront our comfort. There's nothing that confronts comfort like generosity. We've seen this in the history of the church since the first century. And so at the end of every year, it is a tradition at Timberlake for us to finish strong with a special year-end gift. If this is your church, I'm asking you to make a special year-end gift over and above your regular giving sometime between now and the end of the year. Now again, we do this every year, but we're trying to be ultra clear this year in what those gifts go towards. So we're gonna fund 3 specific initiatives to prepare for the future that fall into here, near, far. Now for the sake of clarity, What we're going to fund will be in addition to the ongoing mission work and mission partners we already support throughout the year. So we're gonna continue supporting Union Gospel Mission, Acres of Diamonds, Young Life, so many other high impact ministries that we show you on video or we talk about. But in 2025, we want to fund 3 initiatives at an elevated level to help us prepare for the future. And we're gonna give toward those initiatives from now to the end of the year. The first initiative would be here, our campus. Right? Our facility allows us to do what we do, but it was built almost 25 years ago. You walk in, you do a quick scan, you're like, this place is looking good. But if you look closely, it is dirty, it is worn, it's starting to have holes. Our Christmas Eve services have created more wax around here than a candle factory. It is ridiculous. And so we want to prepare to invite family and friends, as we continue to invite family, we want to be prepared to welcome them into a clean and vibrant campus for many years to come. So in the coming year, our plan is to replace our seating and to renovate and update our lobby. Now, there's other things that need to be done around the facility, but that's our focus. The second initiative is near. That's our community. The biggest challenge that churches and nonprofits in our community face is issues related to staffing and leadership. And so as a way of addressing that, we started a residency program to train church leaders for the East Side and the greater Seattle area. We did that a couple years ago. We just feel like this is the biggest way that truly we can bless our community. And even though the program is just 2 years old, we've already had 15 residents join us. There's more individuals wanting to participate. It seems like every couple weeks now we're getting more and more interest and people saying, I want to be a part of that. And it's super exciting. It's a 2-year program. And so our biggest hurdle is housing for out-of-state residents. Right now, we're just kind of piecemealing housing together. And we just know as we move in the future, we need to invest in condos for housing to be prepared. The third initiative is far. This is outside of our local communities. One of our long-term partners in addressing to disaster and crisis around the world is Convoy of Hope. And anytime there's a disaster, we'll send a special gift to Convoy. But in talking with them, we realize it's actually way more effective for us to be prepared on the front end. And so we're gonna fully fund 20 shipping containers filled with emergency resources ready to go when disaster strikes. And what I love about Convoy is they work so closely with local churches. And so instead of being the hero where they show up with these semis and open the door, these freight containers, what they do is they work through local churches. So local churches, long after Convoy's gone, can still be there helping people find and follow Jesus. And so on your way out today, you're gonna receive a flyer that looks like this. It's gonna give you a few more details, hopefully bring clarity to any questions that you might have. What I'm asking you to do very clearly is to join my wife and me in preparing for the future by giving a special gift over and above your regular giving sometime between now and the end of the year. And then I'm asking you to join us in a renewed emphasis on prayer starting in the new year. Now, if you've never given or you've been sporadic in your giving, this would just be a great time to say, hey, this is over and above what I would regularly do. We've budgeted $1.2 million for these initiatives above our regular giving from now to the end of the year, which is a lot of money. I realize that. But this is why it's gonna require 100% participation. That's what we're praying for. And we're all at different places financially and stuff. This is not about equal giving, it is about equal sacrifice. If this is our church, we're just saying, God, we're all just doing our best. So at the end of the service, as you leave, you're gonna be handed a flyer with clarifying information. Here's what I need you to hear. I'm not gonna be doing cartwheels for the next 8 weeks and setting off fireworks and doing these high pressure sales, coming out here with my suit and tie and making you sign on some dotted line. Dude, that's not the way I operate. I'm presenting you their vision and trusting you. Just like I trusted you 1 year ago when we decided to eliminate passing offering buckets in our services because we felt like it would help us in our mission of helping people find and follow Jesus by not putting this pressure of a bucket in front of them. And I already said this, it'd be way easier for me not to ask you to do anything. It'd be way easier for us to get comfortable. But then we'd miss the mission God has for us. The summary of his mission handed to his disciples and eventually handed off to us is to help people find and follow Jesus. And when people do that, when they begin to follow Jesus, it's followed up as a way of them indicating the decision they made with water baptism. And since 1989, we have baptized well over 1,000 people. In just a moment, we're gonna baptize some more. Would you pray with me? Our Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessings that we as a church are experiencing from the generations of sacrifice and the people whose hearts you have moved on since 1989. We're so grateful to be recipients and to enjoy a building like this and to have the staffing and the programs. Help us to steward it responsibly. To you be the glory. We point the arrow to you and the hope and healing that's found through Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. Water baptism is a way of saying, hey, I've surrendered my life to Jesus, but if I was perfect, I wouldn't need Jesus. And so I've surrendered to him. And here's what we celebrate in water baptism. When people go down into water, it's their way of identifying with Jesus to say, hey, just like Jesus died and was buried, my old life is dead and buried. When we come up out of the water, we say, it's just like Jesus was resurrected. We've been resurrected to new life.
Come on, let's stand as we celebrate baptisms together. From the beginning, you've been unchanging. Age to age you stay, constant you remain. Every mystery, the questions I've carried are safe within your will. So I trust